Friends, what if I told you that once, British naval engineers took a battleship gun, a weapon weighing 120 tons, and mounted it on a submarine? Not a scaled-down copy, not something similar, the real thing. That very gun that stood on the most fearsome warships in the world. And this isn't a rumor. This is the story of the M1 class submarine. I spent several weeks studying archival documents, technical reports, and official investigation materials. And the deeper I dug, the more I realized almost no one knows this story. And those who do only tell half of it. Today, you will hear everything. You will learn why the British submarine fleet's most powerful idea was born out of shame and failure. You will find out what actually happened on a cold November morning in 1925, when 64 people went underwater and never returned. And you will discover what divers found after 73 years of silence at a depth of 75 meters. I promise you one thing, by the end of this video, you will look at submarines with completely different eyes. So, November 1925, the English Channel. Gray sky, gray water. British warships stand at the rendezvous point and wait. This is an exercise. A routine, planned exercise. Nothing special. The M1 was supposed to surface at the scheduled time. She did not surface. An hour passed. The radio was silent. 2 hours passed. The surface of the water remained empty. No conning tower, no air bubbles, no oil slick, nothing. Only waves and wind. There were 64 people on board the M1. The search operation began immediately. The Navy combed the entire exercise area. Divers went down again and again. 3 weeks of searching. Nothing. The M1 vanished as if she had never existed. Only much later, while reviewing the logs of civilian vessels, did investigators stumble upon one entry. The Swedish merchant steamer Vidar had passed through the area that day. The officer of the watch saw a British submarine. She was on the surface, then began to dive. A few minutes later, the steamer felt a slight impact against the hull. Not very strong. The officer recorded it in the log and forgot about it. He didn't know he had just become the last person to see the M1. The submarine's hull would only be found in 1998, 73 years later, at a depth of 75 meters. But to understand what happened to the M1, you have to understand what she was. And she was something truly special. The British Admiralty mounted a 305mm gun on her, a battleship gun. The largest gun ever carried by a submarine in history. And this decision wasn't born out of genius. It was born out of desperation. Imagine this scene. A submarine, periscope depth. The commander looks through the eyepiece and sees the target. An enemy ship, large, slow, moving on a straight course. A perfect target. Distance, less than 100 meters. It's impossible to miss. The command is given. The torpedo is away. Impact. Contact. And nothing. The ship continues on its course. The torpedo hit the side exactly and failed to explode. It simply bumped against the steel and sank to the bottom. The enemy ship didn't even slow down. This is not fiction. This is a documented fact from the British Naval Archives of the First World War. By 1916, the British submarine fleet faced a problem that was not spoken of aloud. Torpedoes didn't work. Not always, but often enough for it to become a catastrophe. Let's break down exactly what was going wrong. A torpedo of that time was a complex mechanism. Inside was compressed air, a gyroscope, a steering system, and a fuse. All of this had to work simultaneously under conditions of impact with water, depth pressure, rolling, and vibration from the shot. Any failure in any of these mechanisms, and the torpedo goes wide. Or worse, it hits the target and doesn't explode. The fuses were a particular pain. They could trigger from the impact with the water upon firing. They could fail to trigger upon hitting the ship's side. They could go off at depth, away from the target, simply because the mechanism failed. No predictability. No reliability. But that wasn't all. The range of a torpedo in 1916 did not exceed 900 meters. 900 meters is less than a kilometer. It's a distance a person can walk in 10 minutes. For a sea battle, this was catastrophically short. Think about that figure. To fire a torpedo with a chance of hitting, a submarine had to approach the target almost point blank. At 900 meters, you were in the direct line of sight, in the zone of anti-submarine gunfire, in a zone where any escort destroyer could simply ram the submarine or drop depth charges on it. Submarine commanders were trapped. Getting close enough meant risking destruction. Firing from a safe distance meant almost certainly missing or experiencing a failure. Now remember that case at the beginning. 100 meters, a direct hit, fuse failure. The commander watched the departing ship through the periscope and knew. He had done everything right. Absolutely everything. And he still lost. It was reports like these that landed on the desks at the British Admiralty, one after another, again and again. And it was these reports that forced someone there, we don't know his name, history hasn't preserved it, to ask a question that initially seemed absurd. What if we forget about torpedoes? What if we put something else on a submarine? Something that fires further, hits more accurately, and is guaranteed to explode on impact? What if we put a gun on it? In 40 minutes, you will see what remains of the M1 at the bottom of the English Channel. What exactly the hull revealed about the boat's final seconds. But first, we need to understand exactly which gun was entrusted with this mission, and why its size is still mind-boggling. A gun on a submarine was not a new idea. By 1916, practically all submarines carried small guns on their decks, 76 millimeters, 100 millimeters, for shelling merchant ships, for self-defense against aircraft. This was normal. This was familiar. But the man who came up with the M-series had something else in mind, something very different. He proposed taking the main battery gun of a battleship, a weapon installed on the largest warships in the world, and putting it underwater, mounting it on a submarine, making a submarine into something that had never existed, a submarine monitor. 305 millimeters. For comparison, that's the diameter of a railway wheel. A shell of such caliber weighs more than 300 kilograms. One shot from such a gun is capable of breaking a destroyer in half. One shot. And here a logical question arises. Fine, the power is clear. But how was it supposed to work? A submarine cannot fire a gun underwater. She must surface. Surfacing takes time. During that time, the enemy will either get away or open fire. The Admiralty understood this, and they had an answer. The plan was as follows. The boat stays at periscope depth. The commander selects a target through the periscope. The gun is loaded, pay attention, underwater, right now, while the boat is still submerged. Then the submarine surfaces rapidly. The gun is already loaded. The crew is already in position. One shot, immediate submergence. The entire operation? Seconds. It sounds like an ideal solution, almost surgical. There was one problem. Loading a 305 millimeter caliber gun underwater is physically impossible. The breech of such a gun, when opened, connects with the outside environment. At a depth of several meters, water pressure simply wouldn't allow the breech to open. And if by some miracle it did open, water would rush into the hole with enough pressure to kill a person instantly. The designers knew this from the very beginning. Think about that sentence. They knew. The project was created around a tactical concept that the creators themselves admitted was unfeasible. The central idea, loading underwater, never worked. Not in tests, not in theory. Never. And they continued anyway. Why? Because even without that, the gun gave the submarine a capability it never had. To strike a large ship with a guaranteed result. One shot of .305 caliber left no chances. The problem of torpedoes, the unreliability of the fuse, the short range, the unpredictability, disappeared completely. A shell flies where it is aimed. A shell explodes on impact. Always. The Admiralty approved the project, but for this idea, they needed a hull, large enough to withstand the weight of 120 tons of steel above the deck, strong enough not to collapse from the recoil of the shot. And such a hull already existed. It belonged to the most unsuccessful, most dangerous, most hated series of British submarines in naval history. In 1916, the British Navy received the submarine of its dreams. At least, it seemed so on paper. The K-series was created with one goal: to keep up with the surface fleet. Battleships and cruisers moved at a speed of 21 to 24 knots. Ordinary submarines of that time could manage a maximum of 15 on the surface. They simply couldn't operate with the fleet. They fell behind, got lost, and became useless. The Admiralty wanted a submarine capable of sailing alongside the fleet at the same speed, in any conditions. To achieve this, the K-series boats were fitted with steam turbines. Yes, steam, on a submarine. The logic was this: a steam turbine provides power unreachable by a diesel engine. The K-series boats developed 24 knots on the surface, a record for submarines of that time. On paper, it was a triumph of engineering. On the water, it was a nightmare. To dive, the steam plant had to be shut down, the boilers cooled, the smokestacks tucked under the deck, and special hatches sealed. Only then could the boat submerge. The entire procedure took from 3 to 5 minutes. 3 to 5 minutes on the surface, in combat conditions, when every second counts. But that was still tolerable. The real problems began with the details. Steam boilers required ventilation. There were many holes, valves, and air intakes in the boat's hull, all for servicing the steam plant. Every one of them was a potential point of failure. Every one could fail to seal in time. Every one could let in water. The pipes overheated. The valves jammed. The mechanisms for retracting the funnels broke at the most inopportune moments. Once, a K-series boat began diving with an unsealed boiler room vent. Water rushed inside before anyone had time to react. The people in the engine room couldn't get out. The K-series boats began to sink before they ever met a single enemy. And that's when the nickname that stuck to the series for good came into use. Sailors didn't call them by letters and numbers. Sailors called them simply the killing class. Except they killed their own. 8 major accidents during the series' service. 8 is not a statistic, it's a sentence. Collisions, navigational catastrophes, unexplained sinkings. The K-13 sank during trials. The K-4 was rammed by its own squadron in the dark. The K-17 was sunk by its own destroyer. The K-1 collided with the K-4. In February 1918, in the Firth of Forth, something occurred that sailors would later call the Battle of May Island. In a single night, 5 K-series boats collided. 2 ships sank. Over 100 people died. There was no enemy in that battle at all. The boats destroyed each other. After that, the Admiralty made a decision. Remove the steam plants from the remaining hulls. Replace them with a diesel-electric system, compact, reliable, proven. Keep the hulls. They were large, strong, and well-built. The hull itself was the only thing on the K-series boats that worked as intended. And that's when the crazy idea with the battleship gun was remembered. A large hull, a new power plant, and a gun that took your breath away just by looking at it. Imagine standing on the pier. Before you is a submarine. Long, dark, sitting low in the water. An ordinary submarine. And suddenly, you see it. The gun. It sticks out above the deck like something foreign, as if someone took a ship and stuck a piece of another, much larger ship into it. A barrel 12 meters long. The diameter of the muzzle, 305 millimeters. Imagine a railway wheel. That was roughly the diameter of the barrel of this gun. The Mark 9 gun. The main battery weapon of British pre-dreadnought battleships. Weight, 120 tons. That's heavier than most locomotives of that time. That's heavier than 2 railway cars loaded to the brim. 120 tons of steel fixed to the deck of a submarine that itself weighed less than 2,000 tons. A shell for such a gun weighed 385 kilograms. To lift one shell, a mechanical device was needed. It was physically impossible by hand. Firing range, up to 13 kilometers. 13 kilometers is a distance from which the gun could hit a target invisible to the naked eye. But the total ammunition load of the M1 was 29 shells. 29. A real battleship carried 80 to 100 shells for each gun. The M1 had one gun and 29 shots in total. For the whole campaign. For the whole war. Mounting the gun on the hull was its own engineering feat. The deck had to be significantly reinforced. A standard design simply wouldn't have withstood such weight and such recoil. The gun base went deep into the boat's hull, taking up space that in an ordinary submarine was allocated for equipment and living quarters. The entire internal layout of the boat was built around this gun, not the other way around. The gun became the center of the M1's universe. And this is where the most interesting part begins. Remember the tactical concept? Surface, fire, dive? In practice, it looked like this. The boat moves at periscope depth. The gun crew stands ready inside the hull. The commander gives the command to surface. The boat begins to rise. The gun crew hatch opens. Men scramble out onto the wet, swaying deck. Water is still draining from the hull. Wind, spray, rolling. The crew takes positions at the gun. The breech is opened. A shell is loaded. A charge is loaded. The breech is closed. Aiming, fire. The crew had 30 seconds for all of this. 30 seconds while the boat is rocking on the waves. While the enemy's lookouts are watching through binoculars. While the rangefinders on the enemy ship are taking a bearing and passing data to the guns. 30 seconds isn't that much, you might say. But here's what you need to understand. In 30 seconds, a trained artillery crew on a surface ship had time not only to aim the gun, but to fire the first shot in response. The M1 had to hit the target before the enemy could react. With one shell, on the first try. There was no room for error. In trial firings, the gun proved itself flawless. Accuracy, range, destructive power, everything matched the characteristics of a battleship gun. When the M1 fired a volley, the sound could be heard for several kilometers. The recoil made the boat's hull shudder throughout. All 64 people inside felt this impact physically. The gun worked. The boat worked. The concept did not. The M1 joined the British fleet in April 1918. 7 months remained until the end of the war. Let that fact sink in. Years of design, debates in the Admiralty, engineering solutions that no one had ever made before, hull redesign, mounting 120 tons of steel on the deck of a submarine, trials, firings, refinements, 64 crew members who learned to live and work next to a gun that took up half of their ship. And all of this for the sake of a war that ended 7 months after the boat was commissioned. Imagine what it was like for the commander of the M1, standing on the bridge, looking at the empty horizon and knowing your ship was created for one specific task, and that task no longer exists. Nevertheless, the Navy did not decommission the M1 or scrap her for metal. The boat remained in service. Exercises began, attempts to turn a tactical concept into a refined combat maneuver. Commanders replaced each other, crews trained. Again and again, the same thing was practiced. Surfacing, taking positions at the gun, aiming, a simulated shot, diving. 30 seconds, 30 seconds, 30 seconds. On shore, everything looked convincing. The stopwatch showed the necessary numbers. Admirals nodded. But the people who served on the M1 understood something that wasn't written in any reports. The sea is never like it is in exercises. In real conditions, in heavy seas, in wind, In poor visibility, 30 seconds turned into 45, into a minute. The crew slipped on the wet deck. The gun breech jammed from sea salt. Once, during a training surfacing, a wave washed over the deck before the last crew member could reach his position. The man was swept overboard. He was recovered, alive, but shaken. That was a peaceful day. Those were exercises. Now imagine this in combat conditions. With an enemy ship on the horizon, with its guns already pointed in your direction. Additionally, the M1 had another problem that wasn't spoken of aloud. The massive gun above the deck created additional drag when moving underwater. The boat was less maneuverable than an ordinary submarine. Diving took more time. The gun, which was supposed to be the M1's main trump card, simultaneously made her more vulnerable. Life for the crew on board was its own story. The M1 was large by the standards of submarines of that time, 90 meters long, 64 personnel. By surface fleet standards, tiny. 64 people shared a space dominated by the gun. Its base went into the hull, taking up room. Its ammunition, 29 shells weighing almost 400 kilograms each, was stored in special racks that also took up space. People slept in shifts, ate in cramped quarters, moved through narrow passageways, getting used to dodging mechanisms and bulkheads. The smell of machine oil, damp metal, and cooking food mixed in the air, which was never truly fresh. This was their life, month after month, year after year. The M1 went to sea, returned, went out again. Exercises in the English Channel, exercises in the North Sea, exercises off the coast of Scotland. The Mark 9 gun never fired at a real enemy once, not a single time in its entire service. By the mid-20s, it became obvious. The era of submarine monitors was ending before it had even begun. The Washington Naval Treaty of 1922 imposed limits on the caliber of submarine guns. 305 millimeters, banned. The Admiralty began discussing the conversion of the M-series boats. The M1 continued to serve, went to sea, returned, until that November morning when she didn't return. November 12, 1925, 5 o'clock in the morning. Portsmouth is still asleep. It's quiet on the pier. The cold autumn air smells of salt and fuel oil. Somewhere in the darkness, water splashes against the sides of ships. The M1 is preparing to go to sea. This is a routine exercise, nothing special. The boat will head out into the English Channel, perform standard maneuvers, and return by evening. The crew has done this dozens of times. 64 people take their places. Mechanisms are checked, hatches are sealed, engines are started. The commander is Lieutenant Commander Boys, an experienced officer. Not his first outing and not his first exercise. The boat leaves the pier. The next few hours pass normally. The M1 travels on the surface through the channel. The weather is moderate. The swell is small. Visibility is decent. Regular radio contact is maintained with escort ships. Everything is according to plan. Around noon, the M1 receives the command to begin a training dive. This is a standard procedure. The boat slows down. The signalmen leave the bridge. Hatches are sealed, one after another. The hull begins to slowly go underwater. The bow dips, then the stern. A foamy wake on the surface. And silence. Only ripples on the water, which quickly smooth out. The escort ships record the time of the dive, and they begin to wait. The M1 does not surface at the scheduled time. 10 minutes pass. 20. The radio is silent. The surface of the water is empty. No conning tower, no wake, no signal buoy. On the escort ships, at first, they don't understand what is happening. Maybe technical issues with communication. Maybe the boat surfaced at a different point. Maybe a small deviation from the course. The ship commanders look through binoculars, scanning the horizon. The horizon is empty. An hour passes. The Navy begins a search operation. Ships fan out, combing the area. Divers go down, as far as the depth and equipment of that time allow. Nothing. No debris. No oil slick. No bodies. 64 people simply vanished. The search continues for 3 weeks. The Navy utilizes all available equipment. The area is combed again and again. The result is the same: nothing. An official investigation begins immediately. Investigators interview the crews of the escort ships, study the route, and analyze the last radio messages. And that's when one of the investigators requests the logs of all civilian vessels in the exercise area that day. That is exactly how they find the entry in the log of the steamer Vidar, a Swedish merchant steamer. It was sailing a routine commercial course through the channel. Its officer of the watch had seen a British military submarine at noon. She was sailing on the surface on a parallel course. Then the boat began a dive. The watch officer watched as she went under. It was interesting. You don't see that every day. He recorded it in the log. He turned away. A few minutes later, the steamer felt a light impact. Not strong, a barely perceptible jolt in the hull, as if the vessel had passed through a heavy wave or hit something underwater. The watch officer looked overboard. Nothing. The water surface was clear. He shrugged, made a short entry in the log, and forgot about it. When investigators read that entry, everything fell into place. The steamer Vidar had rammed the M1 at the moment of submergence. The submarine was going underwater. The steamer was following its course. At the moment when the M1's conning tower was near the surface, almost invisible, almost indistinguishable from the bridge of a merchant vessel, the Vidar passed directly over her. The steamer's sharp bow, or its propellers, sliced open the submarine's hull like a can opener. It happened instantly. Water under pressure rushed inside. The crew had neither the time nor the opportunity to do anything. 64 people, commanders, engineers, torpedo men, cooks, young sailors on their first or second voyage, found themselves trapped at depth, in the darkness, in the cold water of the November Channel. The watch officer of the steamer Vidar didn't know what had happened. He would find out later, from the newspapers, from the official Navy announcement, and for the rest of his life, he would remember that slight, almost imperceptible jolt in the hull, and the fact that he saw nothing in the water and turned away. The hull of the M1 lies there to this day, at a depth of 75 meters, in the cold, dark water of the English Channel, along with everything that was inside. The Navy closed the case. The official cause of death, a collision with a merchant vessel. But one question remained that the official investigation did not answer, a question that would echo for another 73 years. Where is she? 73 years is a very long time. In 73 years, 3 generations grow up. Wars begin and end. Empires fall. The world changes beyond recognition. In 73 years, people managed to forget almost everything. The M1 was not forgotten. But she could not be found. The problem was simple and insurmountable. The technology of 1925 did not allow for a full-scale search at a depth of 75 meters. The diving equipment of that era allowed for a maximum of 30 to 40 meters. Hydroacoustics were primitive. No remotely operated underwater vehicles, no high-resolution sonars, no precise navigation systems. The Navy knew the approximate area. Approximate was all they had. Official searches continued for several weeks in 1925 and were called off. Not because the Navy didn't want to find the boat, but because they couldn't. The English Channel is one of the busiest sea routes in the world. Strong currents, poor visibility, a silty bottom that swallows and hides everything that lies upon it. The M1 lay on the bottom, and the bottom claimed her. Years passed, then decades. The families of the deceased received official notices. The names of the 64 people were entered into the rolls of the fallen. Life went on, as it always goes on, even when one doesn't want it to. Sometimes enthusiasts appeared. Amateur naval historians who dug up old documents, studied the logs of the steamer Vidar, and built theories about the exact location of the sinking. Sometimes someone organized a small expedition, without result. Then came the 80s, then the 90s. Technology changed radically. Multi-beam echo sounders capable of building a detailed map of the bottom. Underwater vehicles with video cameras. Precise navigation systems. What was impossible in 1925 became routine for professional divers in 1998. In 1998, a group of British divers, using modern search equipment, began a systematic sweep of the area where the M1 was lost. They worked methodically, square by square, meter by meter. The sonar drew a map of the bottom in real time, and one day, an anomaly appeared on the screen. A long, elongated object, a clear outline, too regular for a natural formation, too large for ordinary debris. The divers looked at each other. They went down. Imagine this moment. You slowly descend into cold, dark water. Visibility is a few meters. The flashlight cuts through the darkness with a narrow cone of light. Pressure builds. 70 meters, 72, 75. And then, out of the darkness, she appears. The M1, intact, almost untouched. 73 years at the bottom of the channel had not destroyed her, only covered her with a smooth layer of silt and algae. The hull lay on its side, slightly tilted. Incrustations had made it part of the seabed, as if the boat had always been here, as if the sea had simply accepted her and grown still. The divers swam along the side, illuminating the details with flashlights. That was when they saw what explained everything. In the bow section of the hull, a hole, large, jagged, with the edges of the metal bent inward. That was where the bow, or propeller, of the steamer Vidar had entered on that November afternoon in 1925. The impact was so precise and so powerful that water filled the bow compartments before anyone had time to seal the bulkheads. The crew didn't stand a single chance. But the divers noticed something else. The M1's aft hatches were sealed from the inside. This meant one thing. At the moment of the collision, the crew was following the diving procedure. Everything was being done correctly. The commander gave the right commands. The people were doing their jobs. The steamer was simply where it wasn't supposed to be. Remember the promise I made at the beginning of this video? I said, in 40 minutes, you will see what the divers found. This is what they found. The hull of a ship that took 64 lives to the bottom. And a jagged hole that hasn't grown smaller in 73 years. The M1 was declared an official war grave. British law prohibits any work on such sites. The boat will remain where she lies, forever, at a depth of 75 meters, in cold water, in silence. This is the end of the M1 story, but not the end of the M-series story. 3 other boats lived their lives, each in its own way, and each ended in its own way. More on that next. While the M1 served in the English Channel, her 3 sisters lived completely different lives. The Washington Naval Treaty of 1922 put an end to the history of submarine monitors. 305 millimeters, banned. Guns to be dismantled. Boats to be converted. The Admiralty received the order and began to think what to do with 3 large, expensive, well-built submarines that no longer had their main weapon. The answers turned out to be unexpected. The M2 got a hangar. Not metaphorically, literally. In place of the removed gun on the submarine's deck, they built a waterproof metal hangar. Small, streamlined, but a real aircraft hangar. Inside, a plane. A Torpedo biplane, created specifically for this project. Small, light, with shortened wings, to fit into the submarine's hangar. A submarine aircraft carrier. In 1925. The idea was as follows. The M2 goes underwater, approaches the enemy's coast unnoticed. Surfaces. In a few minutes, the plane is rolled out of the hangar, assembled, and started. Takeoff from the water, reconnaissance, return. The boat dives again. The crew trained to perform the entire cycle, from surfacing to the plane's takeoff, in 12 minutes. 12 minutes to get a plane into the air from a submarine. By the standards of the 1920s, this was science fiction. By the standards of 1932, it became an obituary. In January 1932, the M2 went out for exercises off the coast of Dorset. In the morning, fishermen noticed her. The boat was on the surface, the hangar hatch was open. Then the boat quickly went underwater. Too quickly. The fishermen didn't give it any thought. The M2 did not return to base. She was found on the bottom. The hangar hatch was found open at the moment of submergence. The investigators' version, the crew was so eager to beat their own speed record, in such a hurry to close the hatch and dive, that they didn't close it. Water rushed through the open hangar. 60 people. The story of the M2 repeated the story of the M1, almost word for word. A different idea, a different weapon, the same dark water, the same silence. The M3 chose a different path. Where the M1's gun inspired terror and the M2's hangar evoked admiration, the M3 became something much more prosaic. In place of the removed gun, they equipped a special compartment, a long, airtight cylinder along the upper deck, a mine layer. The M3 could carry 100 contact mines. 100. This is a huge amount for one ship, especially for a submarine. She could stealthily approach an enemy port, a trade route, a site of an intended landing, and lay a minefield before the enemy could understand what was happening. The concept was sound, perhaps the soundest of the entire M series. There was a problem. 100 mines weigh a lot. The special compartment weighed a lot. After the conversion, the M3 sat noticeably lower. Her seaworthiness worsened. The boat became slower, heavier, and less responsive at depth. The crews complained. Reports landed on desks. The Admiralty read and nodded. The M3 served, quietly, without incident, without catastrophe. She went to sea. She returned. No records, no tragedies, no breakthroughs. Just service. Day after day, voyage after voyage. In 1932, the M3 was sold for scrap. She didn't perish. She didn't disappear. She was simply sold. Taken apart piece by piece, turned into sheets of steel that went towards something else. This is, perhaps, the quietest end of the entire series. No drama, no obituary, simply decommissioned as unnecessary. I wonder which end is better. The M4 is a separate story, or rather, almost an absence of a story. Catastrophically little is known about the fourth boat of the series. The name exists. Documents of the keel laying exist. After that, silence. In all likelihood, the M4 was never completed. Perhaps she was broken up right on the slipway when it became clear that the M series did not live up to expectations. Perhaps the funds for completion were redirected. There is no exact data. The M4, the ship that almost wasn't, a ghost on paper, a name without a biography. And there you have the entire M series before you. The M1 at the bottom of the channel, the M2 at the bottom off the coast of Dorset, the M3 long ago melted down, the M4 perhaps never truly existed. 4 boats, 4 fates, one idea that never quite worked the way it was intended. But was it a failure? Was it a failure? It depends on how you look at it. If you look at the numbers, yes, the M series did not sink a single enemy ship. The main gun never fired at a real opponent once. 2 out of 4 boats took over 120 people to the bottom. Money spent. People died. The war ended before the idea could be tested in battle. On paper, a failure. But history is rarely read only on paper. Think about this. In 1916, the British Admiralty faced a real problem. Torpedoes didn't work. A solution was needed. Fast, unconventional, bold. And someone proposed an idea so crazy that the first reaction in any normal institution should have been, no. Impossible. Absurd. But they said, yes, let's try. That is not weakness. That is strength. Because that is exactly how engineering thought works in a crisis. Not through cautious, calculated decisions in quiet offices, but through attempts, through mistakes, through dead ends that point the way, even if it's not the way they were originally looking for. The M2 became a submarine aircraft carrier. The concept of a submarine aircraft carrier, born from the failure of the M series, was picked up by the Japanese Navy and taken to its logical limit. The Japanese 400 class submarines during World War II carried 3 aircraft each. They were the largest submarines of their time. This idea was born here, in the hangar on the deck of the M2. The M3 became a submarine mine layer. The concept of stealthy mine laying from a submarine proved so valuable that navies all over the world adopted it. Submarine mine layers exist to this day. Their lineage traces its roots back to the clumsy, heavy, sluggish M3. Dead ends are also useful. Sometimes especially useful. There is another way to look at the M series, not as a failure and not as a success, but as an honest answer to an honest question. The question was, what to do if the main weapon doesn't work? If torpedoes are unreliable, if the range is short, if the fuses fail, if the enemy gets away unharmed after a direct hit. The M series answer was, install something that is guaranteed to work. A gun that doesn't misfire. A shell that always explodes on impact. 305 millimeters of accuracy and reliability, where torpedoes provided only uncertainty. It was the wrong answer. But it was an honest answer. And the people who embodied it, the designers, the engineers, the officers, the sailors, did their work as well as they knew how. In the conditions they were given. With the technologies they had. With the tasks they were set. The 64 people on board the M1 didn't know their ship would go down in history as a dead end. They knew something else, that they were going to sea for duty, that they were doing their job, that they were returning home by evening. On that November morning in 1925, they left Portsmouth. Gray sky, gray water, cold air with the smell of salt and fuel oil. The M1 went underwater at noon and remained there forever, at a depth of 75 meters, in the silence and darkness of the channel. The hull lies on its side. The jagged hole in the bow has long since become part of the seabed. Algae and shellfish have covered the steel in a uniform layer. Nature makes no distinction between a rock fragment and a ship fragment. Hundreds of vessels pass over the M1 every day. Ferries, tankers, container ships. Their passengers drink coffee, look out of portholes, think their thoughts. No one looks down. And there, in the darkness, she is. A submarine battleship. The British Navy's craziest idea. A ship born from failure and having become a failure. A ship whose story is a story of what people do when familiar solutions stop working. When something new must be invented. When time is short, the stakes are high, and the only way out is to try. Even if it is 305 millimeters on the deck of a submarine. Even if it doesn't work.